All right, so today I seen an interesting article at a Zero Hedge, and I thought I would make a video about it. And it's titled 10 Climate Alarmist Predictions for 2020 That Went Horribly Wrong. And it starts by saying, long before Beto O'Rourke claimed that the world only had 10 years left for humans to act against climate change, alarmists had spent decades predicting one doomsday scenario after another, each of which stubbornly failed to materialize. It seems climate Armageddon has taken a permanent sabbatical. And the first one is global temperature up 3 degrees. And it says in 1987, the Star Phoenix in Saskatoon, Canada, quoted James Hansen of NASA's Goddard Institute for Space Studies in New York. His model predicted an average temperature increase between 1/2 and 1 degree Celsius by the end of the 90s. Um, yeah, and basically goes on to say his quote there. Milloy cited former NASA climatologist Roy Spencer, whose data suggests global temperatures have risen 0.64 degrees since 1987. The national NOAA shows an increase of zero point 0.5 degrees from 1987. Number two, global emissions. In 1978, the Vancouver Sun cited a paper in the journal Science. University of Washington researcher Mintz Stiver predicted that the concentration of CO2 in the atmosphere will have doubled by 2020. We will learn that if present trends continue with economics the only limit on the exploitation of fossil fuels, the CO2 concentration will have doubled by 2020. 40 to 80 years after burning peaks that will come mid-century, CO2 concentration will be 5 to 10 times its present level. Yet the CO2 in the atmosphere hasn't even come close to doubling since 1978. According to the NOAA, there was 335 parts per million in the atmosphere in February 2020. Reported 413 parts per million now, again, so an increase of 23%. And again, the other thing too is that the thing that the climate alarmists never bring up about CO2 is that um, the whole if CO2 is going up, the Earth is going to warm is still rather debatable because again, like we've seen multiple points throughout history to where CO2 was far higher than it is right now. And not to mention too, we've seen points in history to where CO2 was very high, yet the temperature wasn't very high comparably, and then we've seen it also vice versa, and where we've seen points in history to where CO2 was very low, but the temperature was also very high. So again, this CO2 and temperature, there's this perfect correlation between it. It's complete bunk. And again, they'll point out, oh, if you do it as a science experiment, yeah, but in the real world, it doesn't play out that way. Emissions from India and China. In December 2009, the Springfield News Leader reported that India and China had pledged to cut emissions by 2020. Again, the reality is that they've gone way up. Let's see what the numbers are here. According to the World Bank, India emitted 1.2 million kilotons of CO2 in 2005 and 2.4 in 2018. Obviously, that's an exact doubling. China, meanwhile, emitted 5.9 in 2005 and 9.9 in 2016, so a 168% increase. So both of them went up very significantly. Both of them went up very significantly. And this is another thing that the climate alarmists, this is the only argument they have whenever you bring up India and China. It's, oh, India and China, they're putting in solar, they're putting in wind. When I don't know if that's actually true. And number one, even if that is true, their emissions are still going up very significantly. Like, I think it's like 2/3 of the world's emissions are from India and China, even though they're what, maybe 35% of the world's population, maybe 40. Again, so this is the thing too when it comes, this is one of the main, pretty much the only argument you need when it comes to debunking the climate zealot narrative is that whether you think climate change is a big deal or not, I think that's completely irrelevant. If you do think it's irrelevant, or if you don't think it's irrelevant, then who cares? But if you do think it's irrelevant, the vast majority of the world's emissions, and especially the increase in emissions, are coming from China and India. If you look at emissions in the States, they're flatlined. If you look at emissions in Canada, they're flatlined. So again, if they're actually worried about climate change, they would be spending the vast majority of their time on India and China, not on Canada or the US. And the fact that they do ignore China and India and spend all their time on the West just goes to show that they have other agendas afoot. Number 4, no snow on Mount Kilimanjaro. Again, obviously that one proved to be incredibly wrong. Number 5, rising sea levels. This is another one that's been proven to be completely wrong. In 1986, the Environmental Protection Agency's Jim Titus predicted that sea level around Florida would rise 2 feet by 2020. According to the NOAA, sea level at the Virginia Key has risen by about 9 centimeters, which works out to 3.54 inches. And this is the other thing too when it comes to the sea levels. Another common misconception is that people think that, oh, the glaciers are going to melt and the sea levels are going to rise, but that's not true because, again, like basic thought experiment here, if you fill up a glass of water, however full you want with water, and you fill the rest up with ice, and you right to the brim, and you wait for the ice to melt, the cup doesn't overflow, right? The cup doesn't overflow. So if every single glacier that is in the ocean melted overnight, the ocean levels would not rise, right? The ocean levels would not rise. So this is another one of the common misconceptions. And another misconception too about the glaciers is that many glaciers have actually grown. The Columbia ice fields, I think it is an example of that. I think there's one in Alaska is another example of that. Number 6, people will become unfamiliar with snow. In March 2000, David Vinner, senior research scientist at the Climate Research at the University of East Anglia in England, predicted winter snowfall will become a very rare and exciting event. Heavy snow will return occasionally, he predicted, but the Brits will not be prepared for when it does. We're going to really get caught out. Snow will probably cause chaos in 20 years' time. About that, snow is still very much a thing in the UK, and Scotland's snowplows called gritters have been very much up to the task. Scotland has gotten about 10 centimeters of snow in some places by early December 2020, the daily record reported. Traffic Scotland says that current winter fleet consists of 213 vehicles that are available for plowing and spreading salt. Anyway, Pacific Islands economy is devastated. In 2000, Greenpeace report predicted that global warming could cause a massive economic decline across at least 13 tiny Pacific islands in the next 20 years. The Australian newspaper The Age reported global warming would devastate most of the Pacific's coral reefs, devastating the tourism and fishing industries of the tiny islands. Yet, according to the governments of Tuvalu's Ministry of Finance, revenues collected from fisheries access increased approximately $10 million in 2012 to 13.6 in 2014. Again, that's another one of the myths debunked. Number 8, global conflict and nuclear war. In 2004, The Guardian reported on a Department of Defense report predicting that climate change could be America's greatest national security threat, among other things. The report predicted nuclear war, endemic conflict over resources, and European cities underwater by 2020. And again, at the bottom, not only has nuclear war failed to materialize, but the world has become more peaceful in the last 30 years. Mathematicians at the University of New York created an algorithm to measure battlefield deaths and has discovered an abrupt shift towards a greater level of peace in the 1990s. This is another one of the biggest ones here. Number 9, in 2013, it's the end of Arctic ice. And it's in 2013, the Lancaster Eagle Gazette reported that NOAA scientists predicted ranges for an ice-free Arctic from 2020 to 2040. According to the National Snow and Ice Data Center at the University of Colorado Boulder, there were 3.9 million square kilometers of sea ice in the Arctic at its annual minimum in September 2020. Again, that's another one of the many lies that they tell people. And the last one is glaciers gone at the Glacier National Park. In March 2009, U.S. Geological Survey ecologist Daniel Fager predicted that the glaciers in Montana's Glacier National Park will disappear by 2020. His current research levels at the temperatures in Glacier National Park have risen higher than predicted in 1992. The Montana glaciers are now expected to be gone by 2020. By 2010, Glacier National Park erected signs warning that its signature glaciers would be gone by 2020. This year, the park rushed to change the signs as the glaciers still existed. In truth, the U.S. Geological Survey warned that the park back in 2017 that the forecast model no longer predicted a great glacier-less 2020, but a park spokeswoman told CNN that the park didn't have enough money to change the signs. The park altered the most prominent placards in 2019, but it is still waiting for the budget authorization to update signs at 2 other locations. The new signs will say when they will completely disappear depends on how we act. One thing is consistent: the glaciers in the park are shrinking. Again, it's just more propaganda. And this is I think the fundamental thing when it comes back to climate change is, regardless of what you think about climate change, given the amount of predictions that these people have gotten wrong, I don't know how anybody can take them seriously. I don't know how anybody can take them seriously, again, because on one hand they say the science is settled, right? Otherwise saying the data is overwhelming in their favor, but on the other hand, they can't make a prediction to save their lives, right? They can't make a prediction if their life depended upon it. So again, which one is it? Well, the reality is very clear that climate change is not nearly the threat as what they're making it out to be. I don't even think it's an issue in and of itself. I think the debate is very clear, is that are we either having no impact at all, or are we having an ever so slight impact? Again, I think that that's debatable, but I don't think it's debatable at this point that humans are having a significant impact on the climate. If we were, these people would be able to make predictions and they would be able to do it relatively easily. But the fact that they can't do that just goes to show that they're wrong, right? They're wrong. And like I say, regardless of whether or not you think climate change is a big deal, given the amount of lies and terrible predictions these people have made, I don't know how these people can make such horrible predictions and still turn around and have people trust them. Like, how can you trust people that have made such terrible predictions? I don't know. I don't know how people can do it. Um, so anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about for this video. Again, if you liked it, make sure you hit that like and subscribe. If you haven't already, make sure you check out those links below. Like I've been mentioning, again, YouTube, Twitter, all these mainline platforms are going to ban me and anybody with any form of credibility at some point. So make sure you get on those other platforms before it's too late. Um, again, all those links are in the description. You can find them all there. Also, again, if you want to donate, you can do that as well. Again, I would very much appreciate that. But like I say, at the very least, just check me out on those other platforms and stay tuned for more.